The movie starts with a narration that details how Egyptian civilization came to be through gods called Osiris, who gave the gift of astronomy, architecture, and culture to humanity, which they later used as an excuse to feel entitled and to try to take over the earth. Some of their believers, including Princess Amanpour, who right before she died, gave away her newborn son to be protected as he was the last of the Osiris bloodline, still believed the Osiris and prepared for their return. Without the pharaoh's knowledge, a gate was constructed deep below the princess's grave through which they hoped the Osiris would be welcomed by the descendants of the princess's bloodline when the stars finally aligned. The pharaoh was suspicious enough to have a key made to lock in the secrets that she may have hidden away inside her pyramid. He assigned a guardian deep inside the tomb to protect and make sure that no one would tell the secret of the tomb so that the Osiris could never return, fearing that if they did, they would scorch the earth in a rain of fire just for revenge. 5,000 years later, the stars are approaching their alignment, but the key to the tomb has been lost for generations, and the sacred bloodline has seemingly vanished. Dr. Doug Adler, a young archaeologist, together with his beloved professor, Dr. Mandela, is searching for the mysterious pyramid in the Egyptian desert, accompanied by Professor Masterson, who's calculated the day of the perfect star alignment to be just in 7 days. Also with them is his assistant, Claire. During the commotion of the dig, while Professor Masterson was distracted, a man steals his sword stick cane, which can be used as a weapon in the wrong hand, and delivers it to the very ruthless treasure hunter Mr. Livitz. And just as you would expect from a ruthless treasure hunter, he uses the cane to murder a Mr. Clefani who had the elusive key in his safety. He then uses the murderer to threaten Professor Masterson to let him join the expedition, or he'll just frame the murder on him because he used his cane to do it. So the professor, without wanting to, lets him join the expedition. To everyone's dismay, a big storm comes that night, which forces the search for the pyramid to be paused. The next morning, they were delighted to find the big storm had uncovered the coveted pyramid. Excitedly, Professor Masterson sends for his estranged daughter Sarah, whom he had with his late Egyptian wife, to come join him. Even though Dr. Doug kindly requests, Professor Masterson was too excited to agree to delay the dig. But unfortunately, the work starts to take its toll on Professor Mandela's health, and he's admitted to critical care with a heart attack. As soon as Sarah comes to Egypt upon her father's invitation, she visits her mother's grave and remembers the stories her mother used to tell her of the great princess Amanpour and her fantastic kingdom, and she vows to find out what happened to her mother. Sarah calls Dr. Doug to arrange a meeting with Professor Mandela, but learns of his unfortunate situation. She then treats Doug rudely and belittles him when he tells her that he can still fill in for Professor Mandela. Masterson was annoyed to learn of the situation as well, but his assistant assures him that Doug is more than capable of filling in, as he's worked under Professor Mandela for 4 years. Sarah apologizes and convinces Doug to join them, and he meets the team, who undermines him greatly and is set to join the expedition. The team consisted of Mr. Livitz, Professor Rohet, Adam, Claire, and a couple of officers from the Egyptian government, and their leader Shahid, and finally Sarah. Masterson gives them an inspiring pep talk that emphasizes how the findings of this journey will change history, and the team decides to camp there in the desert overnight and enter the princess's pyramid at dawn the next day. Sarah and Dr. Doug get to know each other overnight in their camping tents, and Sarah shares that her mother went out to the pyramids alone one night 10 years ago, and that her body was found the next morning. She tells him that she doesn't buy the official report that says that she was killed for her money and jewelry. At dawn, Dr. Doug successfully deciphers the hieroglyphs written at the base of the princess's pyramid, which warns that unless chosen by the gods, no one shall escape from inside the tomb alive. Once they break open the pyramid and enter the first chamber, they realize the next entrance is sealed in. So they again break that open and walk inside the next one, and there they face a hornet's nest. Everyone calmly backs away to the first chamber except Sarah, who was standing on top of the hornet's nests and was unable to move. But fortunately for her, Doug slowly carries her back with the rest of the team. One of the officers sacrifices himself trying to break and clear the nest before his colleague was able to do so with a flamethrower. But it was too late for the first officer, and he doesn't survive the hornets. At the center of the next area, they find a small gold statue. Mr. Livitz greedily picks it up, which activates a trap, leading a huge brick to fall from the ceiling, crushing one of the officers and sealing them in the process. The team panics, and Professor Masterson orders everyone to remain calm and asks Professor Rohet if he can see any patterns on the tiles in front of them so they can crack the code and continue their quest before activating any more traps. Assuming that the ancient Egyptians believed and worked with symmetry, Professor Rohit walks it out and starts taking a few steps forward, but soon realizes that he may be in trouble when a falling brick misses him by a hair. But Dr. Doug comes to the rescue by figuring out the professor's error, which was in assuming a 0 to 10 base system while counting the tiles. And in actuality, the concept of 0 was invented much later than the time the pyramids were built. So they work it out again using this insight and pass through without a hitch. But they then encounter a dead end and everyone goes in different directions to figure it out. Sarah and Livitz were by themselves, and when she asks him what he knows about her parents, Mr. Livitz tells her that nothing was going to deter Professor Masterson's plan regarding the expedition, no matter the cost. This leads her to feel quite confused, as this hints at the fact that her dad might know more than he let on about her mom's death. Rohit and Dr. Adler try to decipher hieroglyphs found in the room, and the doctors suspect that there's a doorway and asks for help lifting the structure in the middle of the room, which reveals a staircase leading to a room housing Princess Amanpour's tomb surrounded by ancient artifacts. There, Sarah is shocked to confirm that her mother was in fact the direct bloodline of Osiris. The team then opens the princess's tomb and is awed to finally see the one whom they have heard so much about and have studied for so many years. Masterson was unimpressed by the princess and throws her body out of the way to get access to what lies beneath. And so he retrieves the key from Mr. Livitz and opens the hidden gateway that lies beneath. They go through the gate and walk through dark, twisted pathways and reach an even darker and narrower hallway. Masterson then volunteers to lead them and orders Livitz to go back in line for all the trouble that he's caused them so far. And so the rest of the team follows. As they walk a few feet, Mr. Livitz decides to let his grievances be known about being treated like a fool and storms toward the beginning of the line to Professor Masterson. Just as he took a few steps, 2 giant bricks come crashing down from the ceiling, dividing the team into 3 in a narrow hallway and leaving everyone panicked and furious at Mr. Livitz. By now it's clear that nobody thinks highly of Mr. Livitz, leading Masterson to remind him of how dispensable he really is. Masterson, Adam, and Livitz keep moving forward as it's the only option that they have now because the brick has shut them off from the other groups. Doug, Sarah, and Claire are sealed in from both sides in the middle and try to find symbols and hieroglyphs to point them to an escape route. In the last section, Professor Rohit, Shahid, and another officer go backwards to try to find a way around. They find an entrance and go through it and start to climb down, and the officer, who was the last one that didn't die, is pushed swiftly by something that they can't identify and falls on the ground below, taking Professor Rohit and Shahid down with him. The two were okay, but they were very sad to learn that the officer didn't make it through the fall. The team in the middle manages to find a way to open the brick on one side and climb through an opening that their friends did to find the deceased officer. Masterson leads the way through the labyrinth, discussing the mystery of how the Egyptian civilization sprang up fully clothed in the banks of the Nile River and speculates that its origin may perhaps be somewhere else. The divided groups run into each other in one of the dark alleys and are led to continue their journey together by the emotionless Professor Masterson. They enter a room with so many mummified beings and wander around inside to learn what they could. But then out of nowhere, Sarah is choked by one of the mummies and Dr. Doug tries to rescue her by attacking it, but the mummy was too strong. Adam intervenes in the chaos and starts shooting him, which doesn't even slow down the mummy. Shahid then comes in for support and shoots at the mummy, but to no effect, and the mummy then attacks and kills Shahid instead. Doug then tells Sarah to try to find an exit while he goes to find the rest of the team. After some running around, she finds an exit, and she figures out how to open the exit but couldn't keep it open, and it starts to slide down. Half of the team goes through and manages to wedge in a brick to keep it from sliding all the way down and closing. As the mummy attacks Professor Rohit, Mr. Livitz distracts it and gets taken instead. Masterson, seemingly happy with what he sees, runs past him to go through the door, but Mr. Livitz somehow manages to escape and slides through the door just in time for them to remove the brick and close the door behind them. Once on the other side, Masterson and Sarah get into a fight about the professor's heartless and inhumane attitude toward the people around him and everything that happens to them. Once they settle that issue, Masterson reveals that the mummy that was chasing them was probably the guardian who was hidden in the pyramid by the followers of Ra and who was designed to be triggered whenever an intruder entered the tomb. He also declares rather passionately and obsessively that nothing will ever stop him from completing his mission. Sarah confronts him about killing her mother, but he dismisses her and moves on to inspect a giant door covered in symbols and hieroglyphs. Doug is asked to decipher the symbols once again, and while he does so, the door starts cracking and they hear the mummies approaching from behind. Masterson asks Sarah to walk to the membrane of the door as she's the key, and Sarah does as she's asked, and the door completely lights up and opens. They go through the next room, escaping the mummy just in time once again. They walk further deep inside the room to see all sorts of ancient civilization markers, including an ancient power generator. The professor orders Adam to bring Sarah over to the ancient throne and to handcuff her to it with ancient brick handcuffs, and Doug tries to protest this, but they aim a gun at him. Masterson goes on to explain that the genetic signature of Princess Amanpour is perfectly intact only in the direct female bloodline. He also talks about how since she's a direct bloodline, they'll need her blood to complete the ritual. So Adam proceeds to cut Sarah's wrist, which really angers Doug, and in protest tries to stop them, but Adam then starts shooting but ends up killing Professor Rohet instead. Masterson confesses that if Sarah's mom had cooperated like he asked her to, she would have been beside him in the throne to inaugurate the new era of human civilization. And so combining the key with Sarah's blood, the professor inserts it to the throne and activates the surrounding, and a hologram of light appears, restructuring the whole pyramid and feeding the mummified beings. The pyramid opens from the top and a light protrudes, hinting at the possibility of the arrival of the king. His face away from the team, toward the light coming from the pyramid, Masterson signs praise to the Osiris and what humanity will be able to achieve in the new era, but Doug sneaks up behind Adam and attacks him and removes the key from the throne. Doug then uncuffs Sarah, who grabs the gun out of the doctor's back pocket and shoots her father multiple times. Having been released from the hospital, Professor Mandela comes to visit the site just in time to see it caving in. And to his relief, he watches the survivors, including Doug, walk out of the pyramid safely. Sarah thanks Doug for saving her life and they kiss, and the movie ends with Claire looking up at the sky and declaring somewhat ominously that they were out there waiting to return.